Hi, this is Lou Pulsfer to talk about 10 things game freelancers need to know. And like my other lists of 10s, or 9s or 4s or whatever they are, this is a summary. It's not intended to be new or original insights. So take it as it is. And all these things have been or will be expanded on elsewhere. This is primarily about tabletop games, because most of the freelancing is in tabletop games, but there are freelancers in video games as well. The most common field for freelancing is tabletop RPGs, writing supplements to role-playing games. Now, freelancers work as independent contractors who are hired to do a specific job for specific pay. Frequently, the employer buys all the rights to whatever the freelancer produces. This must be specified in the contract, of course, and it's called work for hire. There are no royalties. You get paid a lump sum, and that's that. The exception to that is freelance board and card game designers who have designed their game on their own, on speculation, and then offer it to a publisher. They usually get royalties if and when their game is published, but of course often it's not published, so there are trade-offs here. Here's the list of 10. I'm not going to leave this on the screen very long because I'm going to go through all 10. You can stop your video here if you want and look at it. Get a contract is the first one and perhaps the most important of all. The purpose of a contract is to make sure that both sides understand exactly what is desired and what is required. It should specify word count if there's writing involved, the deadline, the method or timing of payment, the number of free copies to the writer-designer if it's a physical product, what rights you as a designer or writer retain, for example, when or if you can resell the work, what about derivative works, what about electronic if it's print, what about print as electronic, and so forth. And for entire game designs, the contract will be more complex. Second, meet your deadline. Many industries are deadline driven, and some industries that game freelancers may work for, or some parts of the industry, may be deadline driven. There are production schedules. They may be determined months in advance, sometimes over a year in advance. You have to meet your deadline or tell your publisher as soon as possible how late you're going to be. You have to, because they have to be able to change their plans, and the sooner they know what's gone wrong, the easier it is for them to change their plans. In general, those who don't meet the deadlines don't get future assignments. It's as simple as that. The publishers cannot afford to deal with people who don't make deadlines. Meet your word count if it's something that has a word count. That word count has been established for a reason, or for many reasons, so respect it. If they don't have a word count and you're writing something like a book or a supplement, ask them for one or suggest one. Now, word counts are not difficult. Any word processor can count the words in a document. But I have encountered some older publishers who think in terms of pages, and then you have to try to figure out how to convert their pages into words. Write design what they have asked for. You've been hired to do a job. You've been hired to do something the employer needs, not something you want to do. Even if you've designed a tabletop game on speculation, it probably won't fit their needs. They'll probably want to change it, if only because. And you need to change it rather than having them change it. Because when a publisher changes things, all kinds of bad things can happen. Sometimes good things, but often bad things. In any case, if you want more jobs, you have to do the right job every time. If you're writing supplemental material for a particular game, know and play the game. In general, there are many ways to know a game, not just playing them, but if you're writing rules for a particular game, you really ought to play the game. And you really ought to do that before you write. Or to look at it another way, if it's for a particular genre, shouldn't you know something about that genre? I'll tell you a story modified so nobody can be identified. I encountered a game designer who had an abstract game. He'd shown it to a publisher, and the publisher wanted to use it for a series of games. And so the first one was about a particular genre. It's a genre where people expect that the game will be a model in some way of the reality, that it'll reflect what actually happens in the stories of the genre. Well, this designer did not know the genre and didn't feel he needed to know the genre. And so he was trying to take an abstract game and turn it into something that would work. Well, I think the publisher had no idea what they were doing, trying to take an abstract game and making it into something for this genre. But in any case, the designer had to do a lot more to learn about the genre. For example, while I was still teaching seated classes in video game design, of course, college-age kids are very interested in zombies. Well, I had not seen any zombie movie in my entire life. In the end, I watched a couple, but I also read the Zombie Survival Guide, so I had some idea of what zombie genre was like. I read on TV tropes, all the tropes of zombie movies and zombie stories, looked at some zombie games, and then I made my zombie games. That's what you've got to do. Copy edit your work. Don't expect them to do it. Now this may seem ticky-tacky to you, but it's very important. Poor spelling is not going to work, because if you're sloppy about spelling, what else are you sloppy about? After all, you're doing your work on a computer. Computers check spelling. The same for grammar. Computers will check grammar. If you haven't bothered to fix it, or to have the computer fix it, what does that say about the quality of your work? Also, there are reasons to have standards in writing. You try to follow the standards, not because they're the rules, but because if you don't follow the standards, a reasonably educated reader, when they hit the non-standard spelling or the non-standard grammar, is going to be distracted. It's like a bump in the road, a speed bump. You don't want to do that. Now, I have a separate screencast about writing well that you might want to look at as well. Now, this is a big one because some people, when they're starting out in the field, when they write something or when they design a game, they feel it's their baby. I'm sorry, it's not. It's a game or a supplement. Even though you may be licensing it rather than selling it as work for hire, the publisher temporarily owns it and they can change it unless the contract says otherwise, and that's quite rare. So changes occur, and it's easy to find stories by game designers of games that were seriously messed up by publishers. But this is true not just in games. I've heard a panel of experienced novelists at Gen Con say the same thing about their novels. They license the novel, but the publisher owns it temporarily, and they can change it. It may be galling, but that's the way it is unless you self-publish. Know the publisher. Publishers and editors aren't faceless, they're people. Understand their interests, their quirks, their dislikes. If you have a good relationship with them, that should help you out. Look at what they publish as well. Don't offer them something that doesn't fit their line. Often I've run into publishers who say, oh, they'll publish anything that's good. But then I start asking them questions and I find out, no, that's not true at all. Within certain parameters, they'll publish whatever is good, but those parameters limit and exclude a lot of things. So talk to them. Be reasonable. You are not nature's gift to the gaming world. course, your publisher isn't either, although some of the big ones may think so. Most of them are reasonable people, and they expect to deal with reasonable people. It's a combination of know your rights and know your place. And if you find you can't work with publishers, if you can't work with a particular one, try a different one. But if you can't work with publishers generally, you're going to have to self-publish. And that makes you a publisher marketer, not a game designer writer. Is that what you want to do? It might be easier simply to be reasonable. Keep in touch. This is simple enough. Publishers like to know you're working on it. If anything looks like it'll go wrong, let them know as soon as possible. I heard a story once from a very experienced writer who said his publisher called him and said, "Oh, well, how are you doing on that novel? It's due in 2 weeks." He had not started it. He'd more or less forgotten about it. It's easy to let deadlines sneak up on you. In fact, I use a reminder program to try to remind me when the deadlines are. And not only was it due in 2 weeks, but Thanksgiving intervened. So he begged a few extra days so he could spend Thanksgiving with his family. And he wrote the entire novel in 2 weeks, 11,000 words the last day. And he made the deadline, the slightly modified deadline. Don't put yourself in that position. Keep in touch. Now, I will have a lot more to say about this topic at some point in a separate course, online course. But I have no specific date planned for it, so it could be a year from now, it could be a couple years from now. As always, you can go to pulseforgames.com and get the latest information and discount coupons for classes.